Yeah, so the first rescue of one of the children by helicopter was somebody being winched down from a military helicopter, where they gave them water, food, and some medicines, I believe, because somebody had already collapsed, and they were able to put a harness around one of the children to extract them, but that was clearly very dangerous. I think they managed to get one more possibly out by winch before they decided it was just too windy and too dangerous. The risk of the cable getting wrapped around the cable car and clearly with catastrophic results potentially going to happen.
Rescue and its risk from Ash Alexander Cooper. He's a former combat helicopter pilot. Ash, very good morning to you. The first child was rescued by helicopter yesterday. Just an extraordinary mission. Explain sort of some of the dangers and the risks at play in trying to attempt something like that.
Well, clearly this was a risky situation with just the fact that the cable car was hanging by one cable or rope that was left. So there was a lot of concern that how long that would last. Just finding enough or the right kind of pilots who can do winching operations would have been a challenge as well. Hence, probably partly due to the length of time it took to get helicopters to the scene. But one of the biggest challenges is that this area where they were operating is both summer in Pakistan and it's high. And helicopters don't perform well when it's hot and high. You lose power, and therefore, if things go wrong, they can unravel very, very quickly. And the helicopter pilot would have very, very little leeway to correct any errors in those kind of environments. So then add a winch and somebody dangling in high winds, and it was extremely dangerous and clearly very unpredictable what could happen and terrifying for the passengers as well as the crew.
So can you explain the operation that they did actually go through, which was successful in rescuing these children?
Yeah, so the first rescue of one of the children by helicopter was somebody being winched down from a military helicopter, where they gave them water, food, and some medicines, I believe, because somebody had already collapsed, and they were able to put a harness around one of the children to extract them, but that was clearly very dangerous. I think they managed to get one more possibly out by winch before they decided it was just too windy and too dangerous. The risk of the cable getting wrapped around the cable car and clearly with catastrophic results potentially going to happen. They then moved to a more ground-based solution once darkness fell, which saw somebody being moved down, effectively pulling themselves along the remaining cable down to the car and then extracting the kids one or two at a time, effectively by pulling themselves up the rope on a kind of a dolly cart.
As a sort of combat helicopter pilot, are you trained to rescue people in scenarios as extreme as this?
Not every helicopter pilot will be trained in winching operations because these are very technical and pretty dangerous. And not all helicopter pilots also are trained in mountain flying. So there are many factors that would have probably limited the pool of people that could have been effectively used in this rescue, which, as I said, may have taken, maybe why it took quite a lot of time before the first helicopters arrived on scene. I think compounded probably with, because I've spent some time in that part of the world, many officials at different levels of local and national will have probably been having their say, which may have caused other delays. But technically, if you can do the winching operations, the more windy it is, then the risk goes up and the danger increases exponentially.
And when would you normally be using sort of techniques like that?
Well, you've probably seen, shows like Deadliest Catch and the like, where Coast Guard and a search and rescue use these techniques all the time to winch people off vessels, sinking vessels, or off remote mountainsides, etc. So these are things that are pretty common, but if it's not a part of your day job, as it were, then these skills are perishable. And if you're not current in your training, then that also adds to the risk. Compounded knowing that the world is watching, I'm sure these pilots had, were extremely stressed and worried about how it would end up with the eyes of the world on them too.
There was significant time pressure as well, wasn't there, for the helicopter operation? Because once it got dark, it then was inappropriate to use that as a method.
Well, yes and no. I mean, ironically, at night the wind would probably have dropped, but if these pilots were not trained in night vision, or night operations using night vision, then that would have been out of play for them. Whereas, I and many of my colleagues have been trained to fly equally as well at night as in the daytime. So, unfortunately for them, it would appear that night meant that the helicopter operations ceased. But in the end, it seemed that the most effective way to get people out was actually from the ground.
How common is it that you end up in a situation like this and you want multiple different sort of rescue attempts happening at the same time?
Well, you'd want to have many different scenarios or contingencies up your sleeve, but command and control would have been probably the most important thing. Have a clear line of command. So whoever was running the overall operation would be being presented both, doctors would have been talking about the medical issues, environmental folks would have been saying about the issues of dehydration and cold and those other things, as well as the pilots themselves and the military, who may be coming up with ways in which they thought might be able to extract the children. All those things would have been considered, but clear chain of command and clear communication would have been key. And it did appear early on that this might have taken a bit more time than perhaps they would have liked.
Thank you so much for just providing a bit of insight into how these operations take place and the training involved. Ash Alexander Cooper, a former specialist military unit commander and combat helicopter pilot. Those children and their teachers all rescued yesterday, having been stuck 900 feet over a ravine. Just quite incredible.